Chapter 1. The Invitation to Murder. The rain had started in the late afternoon, a persistent drizzle that clung to the windows of the carriage as it wound its way through the French countryside. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat with his gloved hands, neatly folded in his lap, his keen eyes studying the mist-shrouded landscape. Beside him, Captain Hastings shifted, letting out a long breath. "Well, Poirot, I must say, this all feels rather cryptic," he muttered. "An urgent letter, an invitation to a diplomatic retreat, and all without so much as an explanation as to why." Poirot smiled, tilting his head slightly. "Mon cher Hastings, do you not think that is precisely what makes it most intriguing?" Hastings frowned, adjusting his hat. "I should think it makes it rather unsettling. What could a diplomat possibly want with a detective?" Poirot plucked a stray thread from his sleeve. "Ambassador Delacroix is a man of intelligence and refinement. He does not summon Hercule Poirot without reason." His expression darkened slightly. "And his words in the letter, a matter of utmost delicacy, suggest to me something of great consequence." Hastings exhaled. "I suppose we shall soon find out. Chateau de Beaulieu, wasn't it? I must say the French do have a flair for naming their estates. Sounds rather grand, doesn't it?" The carriage came to a slow halt before the wrought-iron gates of the estate. The driver exchanged a few words with the uniformed gatekeeper, who nodded and stepped aside. The path leading to the chateau was lined with ancient trees, their boughs heavy with raindrops, their trunks half lost in swirling mist. The grand building soon loomed into view, an opulent structure of white stone, with ivy creeping up its sides and windows glowing warmly against the evening gloom. As they alighted, the doors opened, and a butler greeted them with a formal bow. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome to Chateau de Beaulieu. Ambassador Delacroix awaits you in the drawing-room." They were led through a long corridor lined with gilded portraits of French nobility. The scent of wax-polished wood and aged parchment filled the air, and the faint murmur of conversation echoed from the grand salon. When they entered, the room was already occupied by an eclectic mix of guests. A middle-aged man with a distinguished air stood near the fireplace, Ambassador Lucien Delacroix himself. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair combed back neatly. His face, however, bore the strain of a man carrying an unseen burden. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice smooth, yet tinged with something Poirot could not immediately place. "I was beginning to think you would not come." Poirot inclined his head. "When a man such as yourself writes to Hercule Poirot, I do—"
"Not delay, monsieur." Delacroix's lips twitched in a brief, humourless smile. "And yet you may come to wish that you had." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Delacroix glanced toward the other guests, lowering his voice.
"But this is neither the time nor the place for such matters. Let us enjoy the evening, yes?" Poirot studied him, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "You are troubled, monsieur, and you fear something, no?" Delacroix's gaze flickered just for a second. Then, with a quiet sigh, he leaned in ever so slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," he murmured, "I am negotiating the most dangerous deal of my life with death itself." A faint flicker of amusement passed over his face, but the tension in his jaw told Poirot this was no jest. Before he could reply, a voice broke through the room. "Lucien, you've been keeping us all in suspense long enough. Introduce us to your guests." A woman of striking beauty strode toward them. She was elegant, her dark hair swept up in a sophisticated chignon, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Delacroix straightened. Countess Sabine de Rochefort, may I introduce Hercule Poirot and his esteemed companion, Captain Hastings." The Countess extended a hand, her lips curving into a faint smirk. "The famous detective," she said smoothly. "I must say, your reputation precedes you, Monsieur Poirot. I do hope you are not here on business." Poirot returned the smile. "That, madame, remains to be seen." The introductions continued. A tall, severe-looking man with a politician's air, Émile Fournier, a high-ranking government official. A younger man with slicked-back hair, Georges, Vaillant, Delacroix's personal secretary. A wiry figure with a calculating gaze, Inspector Leclerc, a police official of some repute, and several others, each with their own polite pleasantries and measured smiles. The evening unfolded with conversation and wine, but Poirot was watching. Delacroix engaged in discussion, but his eyes flickered constantly, his hand gripping the stem of his glass a fraction too tightly. Poirot caught the moment when his gaze settled on Inspector Leclerc, and something passed between them. A subtle challenge? A warning? When the guests had begun to retire for the night, Poirot approached. Delacroix once more. "You are playing a dangerous game, monsieur," he said quietly. Delacroix chuckled, though there was no humour in it. "I suppose I am." "And do you intend to win?" Delacroix's expression turned distant. "That depends, Monsieur Poirot. Do you believe a man can outwit death?" Poirot tilted his head. "Some have tried." "And failed," Delacroix murmured. He sighed, setting his glass aside. "Bonne nuit, Poirot. I fear we shall have much to discuss soon enough." Poirot watched as the diplomat disappeared down the corridor, his footsteps echoing through the chateau. Hastings frowned. "Poirot, what do you make of it?" Poirot did not immediately answer. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the darkened window, where the mist curled against the glass like whispering ghosts. "My dear Hastings," he murmured, "I believe that tonight we have heard the prelude to a tragedy." Chapter 2. The Death of a Diplomat. The morning dawned with a hush over Chateau de Beaulieu, the pale light filtering through heavy curtains as a light mist still clung to the landscape outside. The household was slowly stirring to life, the distant clatter of breakfast being prepared, the murmur of servants moving about their duties. Yet beneath the routine hum of morning there was something else, something intangible but heavy, an air of tension, an unspoken disturbance, like the pause before a storm. Poirot had just finished straightening his tie when an urgent knock came at his door. Hastings, still in his dressing gown, opened it to find a pale-faced butler shifting.
"Uneasily on his feet, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice thin.
"There has been an incident?" The ambassador, Poirot was already moving. The butler led them swiftly down the corridor, his steps quick, his breath shallow. Hastings, still fumbling with the buttons of his waistcoat, hurried after them. They reached the study, a grand room lined with bookshelves, a mahogany desk standing at its centre. The door was ajar, and several figures had already gathered. Inspector Leclerc, Countess Sabine, Émile Fournier, and a few others, their faces grim. And there, slumped over the desk, was Ambassador Delacroix. His lifeless hand rested atop a piece of parchment, the ink still fresh. His expression was eerily serene, his silver hair slightly dishevelled, his lips tinged a faint bluish hue. An empty glass sat beside him, and a small bottle of poison, half empty, stood near the edge of the desk. A murmur of shock passed through the room. "Suicide," someone whispered. Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The stillness of the body, The perfect arrangement of objects on the desk, the locked window, the empty glass, and the faint scent of wine lingering in the air. Hastings cleared his throat. "Good Lord, Poirot, I can hardly believe it. The man was perfectly fine last night." Inspector Leclerc, standing stiffly by the fireplace, cleared his throat. "It is an unfortunate tragedy, but not an entirely unexpected one." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "You expected this, monsieur?" Leclerc gestured toward the note. "See for yourself." Poirot stepped forward and delicately picked up the parchment. The handwriting was neat, controlled, without hesitation. To those,
"I leave behind. The weight of my actions has become unbearable. I cannot go on. Forgive me. Lucien Delacroix." There was a moment of silence as the words settled over them. Poirot read the note again, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It is too
"Perfect," he murmured. Hastings blinked. "I beg your pardon." Poirot set the note down carefully. "Too perfect, mon ami. The words, the structure, crafted with such precision, with no sign of hesitation. And yet, a man who takes his own life is rarely so composed." Leclerc folded his arms. "Poirot, I understand your reputation, but I fail to see what is so unusual. The room was locked from the inside. The window is bolted shut. The poison bottle is here, as is the empty glass. What more do you require?" Poirot did not reply immediately. Instead, he moved with slow deliberation, his fingers gliding over the desk, pausing on the smooth surface where the glass had rested. He then turned, surveying the bookshelves, the rug, the faint dust disturbed near the door. His gaze settled on the empty space on the liquor tray.
a faint smudge where something had once rested. "Tell me, Hastings," he said suddenly, "do you recall the bottle of wine the ambassador ordered last night?" Hastings frowned. "Of course I do. It was a rather expensive one, wasn't it?"
He seemed quite eager to open it. Poirot nodded. "And yet it is not here." The guests exchanged glances. "Perhaps it was finished," Fournier suggested. Poirot turned to the butler. "Monsieur, was the wine consumed last night?" The butler hesitated. "No, monsieur, it was left in the study before the ambassador. Retired for the night." "No one saw it after that?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then we must ask ourselves a very simple question. Why does a man on the brink of taking his own life concern himself with fine wine?" Hastings' expression shifted. "Good heavens, Poirot, you don't mean to say—" Poirot turned back to the body, his sharp gaze lingering on the ambassador's hands. "Monsieur Delacroix did not kill himself," he said quietly. "This was murder." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Leclerc exhaled sharply. "Poirot, be reasonable." Poirot lifted a finger. "Consider, if you will, the glass." He gestured to the desk. "One glass remains, and yet, if the ambassador intended to drink alone—"
"Why is there a space where another glass once stood?"
Hastings straightened. "You mean someone else drank with him?" Poirot inclined his head. "Ah, precisely. And if that is the case, then this is no simple suicide." Silence stretched across the room. Then, from the doorway, Countess Sabine let out a soft laugh. "Fascinating, Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, stepping forward. "But tell me, if it was murder, how do you explain the locked door?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, madame, that is the question, is it not?" He turned back to the study, the scent of wine still lingering faintly in the air. His mind was already working, turning over the details, the inconsistencies, the missing piece of the puzzle. And somewhere in the chateau, someone was watching, waiting, and wondering just how much Hercule Poirot already knew. Chapter 3. The suspect list grows. The air in the study remained thick with unease, the weight of Poirot's declaration still hanging over the assembled guests. Murder. The word sent an involuntary shudder through Hastings as he glanced once more at the lifeless figure of Ambassador Delacroix. The others, too, were visibly affected. Countess Sabine, her delicate features composed yet unreadable, Émile Fournier, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, Georges Vaillant, the young secretary whose pallor had deepened since the discovery, and of course Inspector Leclerc, whose face betrayed nothing but irritation. Poirot turned away from the body and smoothed his waistcoat with a practised air. "Mes amis, it is now a matter of utmost importance that we speak, calmly, precisely, and with great honesty." His gaze swept the room, keen and unwavering. "For it is clear, is it not, that someone among us has played a most dangerous game?" No one spoke. The only sound was the distant chiming of the chateau's clock marking the passing time. Poirot gestured toward the butler. "Monsieur Marchand, I would be grateful if you would arrange for the guests to be assembled in the drawing-room. We shall begin with those closest to the ambassador." Marchand nodded stiffly and exited. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. The little grey cells, they must begin their work." The drawing-room was soon filled with tense figures, each one perched on the edge of their seat, the heavy drapes dimming the morning light. Poirot took his place near the fireplace, his small frame upright, his eyes watchful. Hastings stood beside him, notebook in hand, ready to record the subtleties that Poirot never missed. Poirot's voice was quiet, but firm. "Let us begin with you, Monsieur Fournier." Émile Fournier's expression did not change as he stepped forward. The French diplomat, tall and broad-shouldered, exuded a quiet authority. His rivalry with Delacroix was well known, their political clashes the subject of many an overheard conversation. "I imagine," Fournier said coolly, "you wish to know where I was last night?" Poirot inclined his head. "In my room, preparing notes for my upcoming meeting in Paris. I retired early, before midnight, I believe." Poirot studied him. "And yet, Monsieur Fournier, I am told that you and the ambassador exchanged heated
words at dinner." Fournier's lips pressed together. "It was a political disagreement, nothing more." Poirot lifted a finger. "Perhaps. But tell me, did you see the ambassador after that?"
There was the briefest pause. "No." Poirot's eyes remained on him for a moment longer. Then he nodded. "Merci, Monsieur Fournier. That will be all for now." Fournier stepped back, his jaw tightening as he crossed his arms. Poirot turned next to Countess Sabine. She did not wait for him to summon her. Instead, she rose gracefully and met his gaze head-on. "Do I look like a murderess to you, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Murder takes many forms, madame." She exhaled, tilting her head. "Lucien and I had not been
lovers for many years. Whatever was between us, it was long buried. And yet, madame, I hear that you and the ambassador spoke privately last night."
Sabine's gaze did not waver. "He sought my counsel. He was troubled." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Troubled? About what?" She hesitated, then said, "He did not say, but there was something in his manner, something unsettled."
"As if he knew something was coming." Poirot's fingers drummed lightly against his cane. "And what did you advise him?" Her lips curled faintly. "To be careful whom he trusted." A murmur passed through the room. Poirot observed her carefully,
then gestured for her to sit. "Now, Monsieur Vaillant." Georges Vaillant, The ambassador's secretary looked far less composed than the others. He was a thin man with neatly combed hair, his spectacles slightly askew. As he approached, he wrung his hands together, his fingers twitching. I was in my room," he stammered. "I worked late into the night." Poirot regarded him kindly. "You were close to the ambassador, no?" Vaillant nodded rapidly. Yes, of course. I handled all his correspondence, his appointments, and his secrets." Vaillant swallowed. I don't know what you mean." Poirot's expression did not change. "Tell me, Monsieur Vaillant, when did you last see the wine?"
"Bottle that the ambassador ordered?" There it was, a flicker, the briefest tightening of his jaw. I don't know."
"I didn't pay attention." Poirot said nothing for a moment, letting the weight of the silence settle. Then he merely nodded. "Merci, Monsieur Vaillant." Finally, Poirot turned to Inspector Leclerc. The inspector had remained rigidly still. Throughout the questioning, his expression unreadable. "And you, mon cher inspecteur?" Leclerc's eyes narrowed. "You suspect me now, Poirot?" Poirot shrugged. "I suspect everyone." Leclerc gave a short laugh. "I was asleep, if you must know. Unlike some, I had no business with the ambassador beyond the formalities of the law." Poirot tilted his head. "You are aware, of course, that the ambassador was investigating corruption within the government?" Leclerc's expression darkened. "If you are implying that I had something to hide," Poirot smiled. "I imply nothing. I merely observe." Leclerc's hand clenched at his side, but he said nothing more. Poirot turned back to the group. "One thing is certain," he said. "The ambassador did not die by his own hand, and whoever is responsible—" He paused, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "They are among us now." There was a sharp intake of breath. Hastings felt a chill run through him as he glanced at the others. One of them had done it, and Poirot, he was certain, already had his suspicions. Chapter 4. The Poison Puzzle. The atmosphere in the drawing-room had turned colder, suspicion curling through the air like an unseen mist. Poirot's pronouncement lingered in every mind. Someone in this very room had poisoned Ambassador Delacroix. The faces around him were carefully composed, yet beneath the surface something darker stirred. Hastings could sense it. Poirot smoothed the lapel of his jacket, his gaze falling briefly upon Countess Sabine de Rochefort. There was something there, a flicker of unease beneath her poised exterior. But before he could address her again, a hesitant knock sounded at the door. It was Marchand, the butler, his usually impassive face betraying a trace of concern. "Monsieur Poirot, there is a matter which may be of interest to you." Poirot nodded. "Proceed, mon ami." Marchand cleared his throat. "This morning, Mademoiselle Marie, the maid, came to me in distress. She claimed she had seen something last night. Something she hesitated to speak of until now." A murmur ran through the assembled guests. Poirot lifted a hand, instantly restoring silence. "Where is Mademoiselle Marie now?" "In the kitchen, monsieur. Shall I fetch her?" Poirot glanced at Hastings before giving a short nod. "Yes, bring her here." Moments later, Marie entered, her hands nervously twisting in the folds of her apron. She was a young woman, no older than 20, her wide eyes darting about the room as though she feared reprimand. Poirot's voice, though gentle, was commanding.
"Come, mademoiselle, do not be afraid. Simply tell us what you saw." Marie cast a fleeting glance at the Countess before lowering her gaze. It was late," she began hesitantly. "After dinner, I was cleaning near the study when I saw—" She swallowed. I saw Madame la Comtesse near the medicine cabinet. A ripple of shock coursed through the room.
Hastings found his gaze snapping to the Countess. To her credit, she did not flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, a glint of defiance in her eyes. Poirot, however, remained unmoved. "Tell me, ma chère, at what time did you see this?" Marie's brow furrowed as she thought. "It was shortly before midnight, monsieur." "Were you alone?" She hesitated, then nodded. Poirot turned his attention back to the Countess. "Madame, you understand, of course, that this is a curious circumstance?" Sabine de Rochefort met his gaze with a cool composure. "Curious, perhaps, but not damning, Monsieur Poirot." "Then, if you please, explain." The Countess exhaled, as though mildly exasperated. "I went to fetch a sleeping tonic." Poirot's brows lifted slightly. "A sleeping tonic?" "Yes," she said smoothly. "I have suffered from restless nights. Marchand can confirm that I have used it before." Poirot did not turn to the butler for confirmation. Instead, he studied her, his sharp eyes reading beyond what was said. "And did you take this tonic last night?" A pause. It was so brief that had Poirot not been watching her so intently, he might have missed it. "Yes," she answered. He inclined his head. "I see." The moment stretched, taut with unspoken words. Then Poirot straightened. "That will be all, for now, Mademoiselle Marie." The young maid curtsied quickly and retreated, visibly relieved. As the door shut behind her, Hastings finally allowed himself to exhale. "Poirot, surely you don't believe—" Poirot lifted a hand, silencing him. "Mon ami, we do not believe. We observe." His gaze flickered over to the Countess once more. "And we question?" A voice broke through. "But surely this is a diversion?" It was Émile Fournier, his arms still crossed, his mouth set in a hard line. "I do not believe for one moment that Madame la Comtesse poisoned Delacroix." Poirot regarded him with quiet amusement. "How interesting, Monsieur Fournier. You defend her most ardently." Fournier's nostrils flared. "I do not defend her. I simply recognize when an accusation is flimsy at best. The real question, Poirot, is about the poison itself." Poirot inclined his head. "You are correct, monsieur. That is indeed the real question." There was something in his tone that sent a ripple of unease through the room. "The poison that killed Ambassador Delacroix is not common," Poirot continued. "It is not something one finds in every household. In fact, it is exceedingly rare." A hush fell. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. "Do you mean to say—" Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I mean to say that it was stolen." Effect was immediate. Inspector Leclerc frowned, while Georges Vaillant let out a startled noise. Fournier's expression darkened further, and the Countess, for the first time, seemed to lose some of her composure. Poirot pressed on. "But this morning, I took the liberty of inspecting the household medicine cabinet, and I found something most intriguing." He clasped his hands together. "A vial of strychnine is missing." Gasps rippled through the room. Hastings felt his stomach drop. Poirot continued. "Strychnine, you see, is an unusual choice for a murder. It is a violent poison, painful. And yet here we are." His voice softened. "A stolen vial. A dead man." Leclerc spoke at last, his voice sharp. "Poirot, this is an old house. Many have had access to that cabinet." Poirot nodded. "Just so, mon cher inspector. But one must ask, Who had both the means and the intent? Hastings felt his pulse quicken as Poirot turned back to the Countess. "Madame, you were seen at the cabinet." Sabine de Rochefort drew in a slow breath. "I told you. I took a sleeping tonic." "Then you will not mind if we inspect your room?" Silence. A charged, almost unbearable silence. Sabine met Poirot's gaze, and something passed between them, something Hastings could not quite place. Then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible sigh, she rose. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot, let us go." Poirot smiled. "Excellent." And without another word they followed her out, the tension in the air suffocating. Chapter 5. The Locked Room. Mystery deepens. The corridor leading to the late Ambassador Delacroix's study was steeped in uneasy silence. The heavy air carried an almost spectral quality, as though the echoes of the past evening's crime still lingered within its dimly lit walls. The Countess de Rochefort walked ahead with the same graceful composure that had marked her presence in the drawing-room, yet Poirot, ever the keen observer, did not fail to notice the slight rigidity in her posture, the almost imperceptible tension in her step. Inspector Leclerc strode alongside Poirot, his brow furrowed in evident scepticism. "Monsieur Poirot, let us not forget that the study was locked from the inside. There is every reason to believe that Delacroix took his own life." Poirot gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Ah, mon cher inspecteur, if there is one thing I have
learned, it is that in a case of murder the most convenient explanation is often the least accurate." Hastings, trailing just behind them, frowned. "But, Poirot, the door was locked, was it not?" "Locked, yes," Poirot agreed. "But—"
"By whom?" They arrived at the study, the door standing solemnly before them, its key still in the lock from the inside. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew a handkerchief before delicately turning the handle. The door did not budge. "Still locked," Leclerc noted. "Just as we found it?" Poirot murmured a small before stepping aside and allowing the inspector to use the key. The lock clicked and the door swung open, revealing the room within. The study, which had seemed sinister in the flickering glow of lamplight the previous night, was no less ominous in the dull morning light. Papers remained scattered across the desk where Delacroix had sat, his final moments frozen in time. The glass from which he had taken his last drink remained undisturbed, a grim relic of death. The Countess hesitated in the doorway, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I do not see what you hope to find, Monsieur Poirot. The facts speak for themselves." Poirot stepped inside with measured care, his gaze sweeping over the furnishings, the angles of the furniture, the placement of objects, all seemingly insignificant details, yet each brimming with meaning under his scrutiny. Hastings could see the wheels turning in his friend's mind, the rapid calculation, the meticulous unravelling of what had been staged as truth. Poirot's attention fell upon the large window that overlooked the courtyard below. He walked to it, running a gloved hand along the latch before pressing lightly against the glass. The window was locked from the inside, just as it had been found. "And yet," Poirot murmured, "there is something that does not quite fit." Leclerc folded his arms. "You believe the lock was tampered with?" Poirot gave a small nod. "It is a distinct possibility. Hastings, mon ami, come here, Hastings." Obeyed, stepping to Poirot's side as the detective gestured toward the metal latch. "You see this, yes?" Hastings studied the mechanism. "Yes, of course. It's an ordinary latch." Poirot smiled. "Ah, but is it? Regardez bien, Hastings. The edge of the latch, it bears the faintest scrape, as though something thin and sharp had been slipped into the gap." Hastings leaned in, his brows furrowing. Now that Poirot pointed it out, he could see it. A minuscule scratch along the metal, a mark that had gone unnoticed before. Poirot straightened. Someone, mon cher Hastings, manipulated this window. From the outside, Leclerc's frown deepened. That would mean, Poirot confirmed, that our suicide theory is incorrect. A murmur of unease passed between those gathered. The Countess exhaled sharply. This is absurd. Even if the window was tampered with, that does not mean the ambassador did not take his own life. Poirot turned to her with a look of quiet amusement. Madame, would you not agree that a man who is about to end his own life would not bother to ensure that his study was locked and his window secured? The Countess's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. Hastings, however, was still struggling to grasp the full implications. Poirot, if the door was locked from the inside, and the window was also secured, then how did the murderer leave the room? Poirot gave a small chuckle. Ah, mon ami, that is precisely the question we must answer, but I believe we are closer than ever. He moved back toward the door, gesturing to the lock. Now, let us consider. Could this too have been manipulated? From the outside, Hastings stared at the lock, feeling a headache beginning to form.
How could it be? The key was inside the room. We all saw it. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. Indeed. But consider, what if the key was placed there after the door was locked? Leclerc's expression darkened. You mean to,
Say the murderer locked the door from outside and then slipped the key back in? Poirot nodded. It is not impossible. There are methods. A thin wire, a piece of thread, carefully looped through the keyhole, guiding the key back into place. It would take a steady hand, but it is certainly within the realm of possibility. A silence fell over the room. Hastings could practically hear the gears turning in Leclerc's head, the reluctant acceptance that the case was far more complex than it had first appeared. Then, Leclerc said slowly, we are dealing with someone not only clever, but practiced. Précisément. Poirot turned back to the room, his eyes twinkling with the excitement of a mind on the verge of revelation. And now we must ask, who among our suspects possesses both the means and the knowledge to execute such a deception? A cold weight settled in Hastings's stomach. This was no ordinary crime. The Countess de Rochefort's voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the silence. Then I suggest you find out, Monsieur Poirot. Because until you do, we are all prisoners in a house with a murderer. Poirot merely smiled. Oh, madame, do not fear. The murderer is already caught. Hastings's breath caught. You know who did it? Poirot turned to him with a knowing look. The net is closing, Hastings, but first we must let our culprit struggle a little more. Chapter 6. A motive wrapped in diplomacy, the Countess. De Rochefort's words lingered in the air, her voice edged with an impatience that barely concealed her underlying fear. Poirot, however, remained unruffled, his gaze resting upon her with mild curiosity, before he turned to Leclerc. We must now begin, mon cher inspecteur, to consider motive, and in a case such as this— Poirot spread his hands, his tone light, but unmistakably pointed. Where the victim is a man of diplomatic standing, it is not merely a question of personal grievances, there may be political ramifications at play. Leclerc's eyes narrowed slightly. You suspect this was not just a crime of passion or greed, but something larger? Poirot inclined his head. It is a possibility we cannot ignore. But to confirm it, We must look more closely at what Delacroix was involved in before his death. What did he know? And who stood to lose if that knowledge was made public? Hastings, still piecing together Poirot's deductions, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You mean to say this wasn't just a matter of money or personal revenge? Delacroix
May have been silenced? Poirot nodded. Ah, Hastings, exactement. You begin to see the pattern. The Countess, arms crossed, gave a small scoff.
And do you intend to uncover this great conspiracy, Monsieur Poirot? Diplomacy is a delicate thing. If you start tugging at threads, you may find yourself unravelling more than you bargained for. Poirot's smile was faint, his eyes sharp. Madame, I have unravelled many a tangled knot in my time, and I assure you, no thread escapes me once I have taken hold of it. Without waiting for a response, he turned to Leclerc. Tell me, mon ami, do we have access to Delacroix's personal
Correspondence? Leclerc hesitated.
The embassy may hold some records, but official documents are not easily accessible. However, his expression darkened. There were rumours before his death. It was said Delacroix had discovered something that could have been politically damaging. Ah. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. And what, precisely, were these rumours? Leclerc exhaled, glancing toward the Countess, who remained silent, her gaze fixed on Poirot with unreadable intent. At last,
he said, there was talk of a secret agreement between France and Belgium, a document that could have caused an international scandal.
It was never confirmed, of course, but if Delacroix had evidence, he would have been a danger to many, Poirot finished softly. Hastings let out a low whistle. Good Lord, you mean he was murdered to keep him quiet? Poirot gestured to the study. Consider, Hastings, the staging of the scene, the locked door, the manipulated window, all designed to create the illusion of suicide. Why? If this were a crime of passion, or even one of financial gain, why go to such lengths? No, mon ami, this was not merely to end a man's life. It was to erase him, to ensure no one questioned his death. The weight of Poirot's words settled heavily in the room. The Countess's face remained impassive, but Hastings noticed the slight way her fingers curled into her sleeve, as if resisting an impulse to speak. Leclerc cleared his throat. If that is the case, we must identify who would have been most threatened by Delacroix's revelations. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. And to do that, we must look at those closest to him. He turned back toward the study, moving, with slow deliberation, to the desk where Delacroix had spent his last moments. Poirot's gloved fingers brushed lightly over the scattered papers, his gaze intent. Hastings watched as Poirot picked up a single sheet of parchment, turning it over with meticulous care. The writing was in French, the ink still dark and fresh. As Poirot read, his expression remained unreadable, but when he finally set the paper down, there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. This, Poirot murmured, is most interesting. Hastings stepped forward. What does it say? Poirot handed him the paper. Hastings scanned the contents, his French somewhat rusty, but sufficient enough to grasp the essence. His eyes widened. This is a draft of a speech. Delacroix was planning to make a statement about the agreement. Oui, Poirot said softly, and he would have done so very soon, which means, mon cher Hastings, that someone had to ensure that he never got the chance. Leclerc's jaw tightened. Then we are looking for someone who knew what he intended to do. Someone within his inner circle. Poirot gave a small nod. And more than that, someone who was desperate enough to eliminate him before he could
speak. There was a brief silence, filled only with the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway beyond.
The weight of Poirot's words settled upon them, heavy with the implication of treachery. The Countess, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was cool, measured. Monsieur Poirot, you seem very certain that this was a politically motivated crime. Poirot turned to her with a small, knowing smile. Ah, madam, I am certain of nothing yet. But let us consider qui profite du crime. Who benefits from the death of Delacroix? The Countess held his gaze. Many people, I should think. Indeed. Poirot's smile did not waver. And yet, madame, I have found that the guilty often attempt to cast the widest net, hoping to lose themselves among the possibilities. A flicker of something passed through the Countess's eyes, too quick for Hastings to place, but Poirot had seen it. He turned back to Leclerc. There are certain individuals with whom I must speak, people who may shed more light on Delacroix's final days. Leclerc nodded. Very well. Who do you wish to interview first? Poirot considered for a moment, then said, The secretary, Monsieur Renaud. He would have been privy to Delacroix's schedule, his meetings, his concerns. He may have seen something without realizing its significance. Leclerc gave a curt nod. I will arrange for him to meet us. Poirot's smile widened. Excellent. And while we wait, mon cher inspecteur, I suggest you begin reviewing the security records
of the embassy.
Someone had to enter that study to commit this crime, and I believe you will find that they were most careful, but not quite careful enough. Leclerc's brow furrowed, but he did not argue. With a final glance around the room, he left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Hastings turned to Poirot.
You truly believe we are close to the answer? Poirot gave a small chuckle. Oh, mon ami, we are not merely close. We are already within the lion's den. Now we must simply wait for the beast to reveal itself. Hastings swallowed, feeling
a prickle of unease at the certainty in Poirot's voice. Chapter 7. The Wineglass Clue. The atmosphere in the embassy had shifted. There was an undeniable tension now, a quiet undercurrent of unease that crept through the corridors like an unseen spectre. Poirot, ever composed, moved through the space with the same meticulous care he applied to his cases, his small frame weaving deftly between officials and attendants, his gaze missing nothing. Hastings followed closely, his curiosity sharpened by the cryptic hints Poirot had dropped. Leclerc, on the other hand, wore a grim expression, his mind already occupied with the unpleasant business of murder within such delicate diplomatic confines. They had just finished their interview with Renaud, Delacroix's personal secretary, a nervous, tight-lipped man who had provided little of value beyond confirming what they already knew. Delacroix had been restless in his final days, concerned about the repercussions of his impending revelations. But Renaud had insisted that he had known nothing of a direct threat, nothing that suggested the ambassador had feared for his life. Poirot had merely nodded, his fingertips pressed together, his gaze thoughtful. And then, without explanation, he had requested to be taken to the servants' quarters. Leclerc had hesitated at first. What do you expect to find there, Poirot? The staff may have heard something, but they would hardly be involved in— Poirot had cut him off with a small, amused smile. Ah, mon cher inspector, sometimes it is not the one who acts, but the one who observes, who holds the key to the truth. Let us not be hasty in dismissing the silent witnesses of this affair. And so they found themselves in the modest servants' quarters, a stark contrast to the lavish interiors of the embassy proper. The air was heavy with the scent of polish and worn linen, the muted hum of activity in the background. Poirot examined the space with keen interest, his eyes sweeping over the neatly arranged rooms, the modest furnishings, the personal belongings, tucked away with practiced discretion. It was in a small washroom just off one of the hallways that Poirot paused. A single glass stood on the counter, its delicate rim catching the dim light. Poirot's expression remained unreadable as he reached for it, lifting it carefully and tilting it to the side. A faint residue clung to the bottom, a thin, almost imperceptible film. Leclerc frowned. A wine glass? Poirot turned it in his hand. Oui, and one that should not be here. Hastings peered over his shoulder. But why not? The staff must drink wine as well. Poirot's lips pressed together. Perhaps. But, mon ami, recall our examination of Delacroix's study. There was one thing missing from that crime scene. Was there not? Hastings hesitated, then his eyes widened. The second wine glass, précisément. Poirot set the glass down carefully, turning to Leclerc. You see, my friend, when we found the ambassador, there was only one glass of wine in the room, his own. And yet it was clear from the setting that he had been sharing a drink with someone. A missing glass suggests a deliberate removal, and now we find one tucked away in the servants' quarters where it most certainly does not belong. Leclerc's frown deepened. You believe this was the glass used during his final moments? Poirot's head tilted slightly. I believe it is a possibility worth investigating. He gestured for Leclerc to call for one of the attendants, and within moments a young chambermaid appeared, Elise, a pale, nervous-looking girl with dark eyes that darted between the three men. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, tell me, do you recognize this glass? Elise hesitated. Oui, monsieur, I found it this morning when I was cleaning. And where precisely did you find it? She swallowed. In the corridor outside the ambassador's study. Leclerc's expression darkened. And you took it?
I didn't think it was important, she stammered. It was just a glass. I assumed someone had left it there by mistake, so I brought it here to wash. Poirot regarded her steadily. You did not think it strange that there was a single wine glass outside the room where a man was found dead? Elise's hands trembled slightly. I was afraid. There is already so much talk, so much suspicion. I did not want to be involved. Poirot exchanged a glance with Leclerc, then turned back to her. Mademoiselle, you must understand, any small detail may help us uncover the truth. If you noticed anything else, anything at all, you must tell us. She bit her lip. There was one thing. Hastings leaned forward. Yes. Elise hesitated, then said in a near whisper. There was still wine in the glass, but it smelled different. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Different how? She shifted uncomfortably. Bitter. Not like the wine the ambassador usually drank. Poirot exhaled softly, his suspicions confirmed. Merci, mademoiselle. That will be all for now. Elise curtsied hastily and departed, leaving a silence in her wake. Leclerc turned to Poirot. If the glass contained a different substance, that means... Poirot nodded. It suggests two things, mon ami. First, that someone took great care to remove this glass from the crime scene. And second, that a different poison was used. Hastings's brow furrowed. But that doesn't make sense. Why use a second poison? Poirot gave a small, satisfied smile. Ah, Hastings, that is just the question, is it not? If there were but a single poison, then one might believe the case was simple. But two? That speaks to a crime crafted with intent, a deliberate misdirection. Leclerc's jaw clenched. Which means the murderer was more cunning than we thought. Poirot's expression remained thoughtful.
It means, mon cher inspecteur, that we are dealing with someone who did not merely wish to kill Delacroix, they wished to control the narrative of his death. Hastings frowned. You mean they wanted to make sure we followed the wrong trail? Exactement. Poirot tapped his temple. By introducing a second poison, the murderer ensured confusion. If we had found this glass earlier, we might have been misled, chasing a poison that did not match what was in Delacroix's system. A clever deception, n'est-ce pas? Leclerc crossed his arms. Then we must find out who had access to these poisons. That will tell us who is behind this. Poirot's smile widened slightly. Ah, mon ami, we shall do precisely that. But first, we must ask ourselves, who wanted us to find this glass? Because if I am not mistaken, it was not carelessness. That led to its discovery, but intention. Hastings stared at him. You mean someone planted it? Poirot's eyes gleamed. And that, my dear Hastings, is where the game truly begins. Chapter 8. The Vanishing Farewell Note. The embassy was a web of whispered conversations and lingering glances, the air thick with intrigue as Poirot and Hastings made their way back to Delacroix's study. The discovery of the second poisoned glass had been a revelation, a twist that complicated an already perplexing case. But Poirot was not troubled. On the contrary, his little grey cells were alight with the challenge. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, rearranging themselves in his mind, forming a picture that only he could see. Hastings, however, was less at ease. I still don't understand, Poirot. If someone planted that glass, they wanted us to
find it. But why? Poirot gave a small smile as he stepped into the study, his eyes sweeping over the room with renewed interest. Ah, mon ami, you are thinking like a soldier, always seeking the enemy's next move on the battlefield. But a murder such as this is not a battle, it is a performance. And the murderer? Un metteur en scène, a director carefully setting
the stage, ensuring that we see only what they wish us to see. Leclerc had followed them in, arms crossed tightly. Then we are being manipulated. Naturellement. Poirot's fingers tapped against his lips. The removal of the wine, glass, the introduction of a second poison, these were not acts of impulse but of calculation. And when a murderer seeks to control the narrative, there is often another deception waiting in the wings. Hastings looked around the room uneasily. You think something else has been tampered with? Poirot's sharp gaze settled on the ambassador's desk. With quiet deliberation, he stepped forward and opened the top drawer where they had earlier found the suicide note that had been so quickly dismissed. It was gone. Leclerc swore under his breath. Hastings blinked in shock. But we saw it. It was right there. Poirot's expression did not change. He merely closed the drawer and turned to Leclerc. Tell me, mon cher inspecteur, was the note taken into police custody? Leclerc shook his head, his face grim. There was no need. It was obviously staged, and with the autopsy confirming poisoning, we knew it wasn't suicide. The note was worthless. Poirot clicked his tongue. Worthless? Mais non. If it were truly worthless, why would someone steal it? Hastings let out a slow breath. You think the murderer took it? Poirot's gaze flickered, considering. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone else, someone who realized its importance. He turned back to the desk, his fingers running lightly over its surface, before stopping at a small, almost imperceptible indentation in the wood. His expression sharpened. The desk had been forced open. Leclerc saw it at the same moment. Someone broke in, oui, Poirot murmured. And recently. This was not an opportunistic theft. This was done with intent. Hastings shifted uncomfortably. Then whoever took it must have known it was there. Poirot nodded. Exactement. He straightened, his mind whirring. We must determine whether the note has been merely stolen or replaced. Hastings looked at him in alarm. Replaced? Poirot smiled. Come, Hastings, a murderer who weaves such an intricate tale would not simply remove a piece of the puzzle, they would replace it with another, more convincing one. Leclerc called for one of the embassy clerks, a nervous young man named Moreau, who confirmed that the suicide note had been left untouched until now. But when pressed, he hesitated. Well, he admitted. There was a brief moment, not long after the police first arrived. Madame Fournier insisted on coming in to collect some of the ambassador's papers. She said it was urgent. Madame Fournier, Delacroix's assistant. Hastings exchanged a glance with Leclerc. And did she take anything? Moreau frowned. I do not know. She was only in here a few minutes. She left with a file, but I assumed it was embassy business. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you see the note at that time? Moreau hesitated. I think so, but I didn't pay much
attention to it.
Poirot nodded, his suspicions confirmed. He turned to Leclerc. We must speak with Madame Fournier at once. She was found in her office, a tidy, efficient woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. She did not appear flustered by their presence, merely raising an eyebrow as they entered. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, how can I assist you? Poirot smiled pleasantly. Madame, I must trouble you with a question. Earlier today, you entered the ambassador's study to retrieve some papers, did you not? She did not hesitate. I did. There were diplomatic reports that needed to be handled. Poirot's gaze was unwavering. And while you were there, did you by chance take anything else? Her brow furrowed slightly. I am not certain what you mean. The suicide note, Leclerc said bluntly. It is missing. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not quite fear, but something close. Poirot did not
miss it. That note was irrelevant, she said stiffly. It was obviously forged. Poirot studied her, then spoke with quiet emphasis.
And yet, madame, someone thought it important enough to steal. A long silence stretched between them. Then, very carefully, she opened a drawer and withdrew a single folded sheet of paper. Poirot took it with delicate fingers, his gaze scanning. The words, a slow smile curved his lips. Ah, he murmured. As I suspected. Hastings leaned forward. Poirot? Poirot's finger traced a single sentence. You see, my friends, this is not the note we first read. It is a replacement. Leclerc's eyes narrowed. You're certain? Poirot's smile deepened. Certain, mon ami. The wording is similar, but the emphasis has changed. Our original note was abrupt, its message vague. But this? He tapped the paper. This is far more damning. It confirms a supposed affair. It suggests guilt. It leads us precisely where the murderer wishes us to look, Hastings exhaled. A misdirection, may we? A beautifully executed one. Poirot's gaze lifted to Madame Fournier. Madame, I must ask, why did you take the original? She did not answer immediately. Then her voice was quiet. Because I knew it was false. And I feared someone would try to use it against the ambassador's memory. Poirot regarded her for a long moment, then nodded. A noble intention, but madame, the true deception was already at play. Tell me, who gave you this version to replace it? She stiffened, and Poirot saw the flicker of hesitation. But before she could speak, A sharp knock interrupted them.
A uniformed officer entered, his expression urgent. Inspector, there has been another development. The ambassador's personal safe, it has been opened. A beat of silence. Then Leclerc swore. Hastings turned to Poirot, wide-eyed. His
Safe? Poirot's expression was unreadable. Then, mes amis, we are closer than ever to the truth. Chapter 9. The Alibi. That crumble Poirot sat with his fingertips pressed together, his expression one of deep contemplation. Hastings, pacing the room, stopped abruptly. "You mean to say that Vaillant's alibi is false?" he asked, incredulous. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, "not false, merely incomplete." Hastings frowned. But he claimed he was in the drawing-room with Countess de Rochefort and Inspector Leclerc at the time of Delacroix's death. "Ah, precisely," Poirot said, leaning forward. "Yet the good inspector and the Countess recall seeing him there only for a brief period before he excused himself, and then, poof, he was gone for 20 minutes. Hastings' brow furrowed. 20 minutes is enough time to slip into the study, administer the poison, and stage the scene. Poirot nodded. Oui, but we must ask, did he use that time to commit
murder? Or was he engaged in some other secretive affair? Before Hastings could respond, the door creaked open. A maid hesitated on the threshold, wringing her hands. "Pardon me, monsieur, but I overheard something you may wish to know."
Poirot gestured for her to continue. She stepped inside, lowering her voice. "Monsieur Vaillant received a letter that evening. I saw him open it, and he looked troubled. After reading it, he went straight to the study door before the commotion started." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And what happened to the letter, mademoiselle?" I don't know," she stammered. "He crumpled it in his hand and left the drawing-room. I never saw it again." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "A letter that troubles a man, a letter that vanishes."
"And a man who suddenly disappears from an alibi," Poirot murmured. "Mon cher Hastings, I believe the net is tightening." Hastings exhaled sharply. "But tightening around whom?" Poirot smiled, enigmatic as ever. "That, my friend, is what we shall
soon uncover." Chapter 10. The Affair That Changes Everything. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit study, his fingertips pressed together as he considered the latest revelation. A secret engagement, delicate, scandalous, and dangerous. Countess de Rochefort and Delacroix had rekindled a past romance, but someone had sought to use it against them. The blackmail letter, written in a firm yet untraceable hand, had demanded silence or exposure. "Mon ami," Poirot said to me, his green eyes gleaming, "this affair, it complicates matters most intriguingly." I nodded. If Delacroix was being blackmailed, then surely he would have confided in someone. "The Countess, perhaps?" Poirot shook his head. "No. A man of his stature, his pride, he would try to handle it himself." He reached for the letter, examining it once more. And yet, this letter, it is not desperate. It is precise, controlled. The blackmailer was not seeking to ruin him, but to manipulate him. Before I could respond, the door creaked open, and Inspector Joubert entered, his face set in grim determination. "I've spoken to the Countess again," he said. "She admitted to the engagement, but swore she knew nothing of any blackmail. In fact, she seemed rather shocked." Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, mon cher, did she seem genuinely surprised, or was it the surprise of a woman who lies well?" Joubert hesitated. "It was hard to tell, but one thing is certain. Her maid, Marie, was far too nervous when I questioned her. At this, Poirot's moustache twitched. Marie? Ah, the one who saw the Countess near the medicine cabinet the night before Delacroix's death. Joubert nodded. She first claimed that the Countess was looking for aspirin, but when pressed, she admitted that she never actually saw her take anything, just that she was standing there. A silence settled over the room. Poirot, deep in thought, suddenly stood and smoothed the front of his jacket. "Hastings, we must speak to Marie at once. There is something she is not telling us." We found the maid in the servants' quarters nervously wringing her hands. When Poirot addressed her, his voice was kind but firm. "Mademoiselle Marie, you must not be afraid, but you know more than you have said, oui?" Marie's eyes darted to the door, as if weighing the consequences. Finally, she exhaled. I didn't tell everything because I was afraid. But that night, I saw someone else near the medicine cabinet." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Go on, my dear." She hesitated, then whispered, "It was Monsieur Vaillant." Georges Vaillant. The man whose alibi Poirot had already begun to doubt. "Are you certain?" I asked. Marie nodded. "I didn't think much of it at the time. He was only there for a moment. But when I heard about the poison," she trailed off, twisting her apron between her fingers. Poirot gave her a reassuring nod. "You have done well, Marie. Now tell me, did Monsieur Vaillant see you?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't think so." Poirot exchanged a glance with Joubert and me. This was significant. If Vaillant had been near the medicine cabinet, he had access to the poison. And if he thought no one had seen him, he would have felt safe. As we left Marie's quarters, Joubert exhaled. "That puts Vaillant at the scene with the opportunity. But what about the motive?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "The blackmail, mon cher. Suppose Monsieur Vaillant knew of the affair between the Countess and Delacroix. Suppose he was the one who wrote that letter." I frowned. "But why would he resort to murder?" Poirot halted. "Because, Hastings, what if Delacroix refused to pay? What if he had discovered the blackmailer's identity and intended to expose
him instead?" The implication settled over us like a thick fog.
If Vaillant was the blackmailer and Delacroix had threatened to turn the tables, then the so-called suicide was not just a cover-up, it was a desperate act of self-preservation. Joubert rubbed his chin. "We need to confront Vaillant." Poirot raised a hand. "No, not yet. He is clever, this one. If we accuse him without proof, he will slip through our fingers." I could see the wheels turning in Poirot's mind, assembling each piece of the puzzle with meticulous care. He gestured for us to follow. "Come, mes amis. The time has come for the final test of the little grey cells." Chapter 11. The Psychological. Trappe Hercule Poirot sat in the grand salon of the Delacroix estate, his delicate fingers tracing the edge of his moustache as he surveyed the room. The suspects, no, the players in his little drama, had all been summoned. Georges Vaillant leaned against the marble fireplace, his posture a studied nonchalance, but Poirot noted the tension in his fingers, gripping the mantle too tightly. Countess de Rochefort sat in a high-backed chair, her expression composed, but her gloved hands trembled faintly in her lap. Inspector Joubert stood at the door, arms crossed, watching for the moment when the net would tighten. Poirot let the silence stretch before he spoke. "Mes amis, it seems there has been a grave misunderstanding." All eyes turned to him. "I have reviewed the case, and I now believe we may have been looking at the wrong pieces of the puzzle. You see, a new piece of evidence has come to light, something quite remarkable. There was no new evidence, of course, but Poirot was not above a little theatricality when it served justice. Georges Vaillant's lips parted slightly before he pressed them into a firm line. Countess de Rochefort's hand flinched toward her throat. Poirot smiled to himself. "Ah, yes, this new evidence. It tells us something unexpected. It suggests that Delacroix did not die at the time we originally believed." A stillness fell over the room. Vaillant's fingers twitched on the fireplace. "Imagine, if you will," Poirot continued, "that our victim, Delacroix, was alive later than we thought. Suppose the poison took effect much later than anticipated, perhaps hours later." The Countess spoke first, her voice carefully neutral. "But surely that changes nothing, Monsieur Poirot. If the poison was administered earlier—" "Ah, but it does change something, madame." Poirot turned sharply, fixing his gaze on Vaillant. "It means that whoever had an alibi for the time of death does not have an alibi at all." Vaillant scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "Ridiculous, monsieur? And yet you seem most concerned." Joubert stepped forward.
"I wonder, Monsieur Vaillant, where exactly were you after midnight that night?" Vaillant's jaw tightened. "You already know. I was playing cards at the club." "Oui," Poirot murmured. "So you claim. But what if Delacroix was poisoned?"
"Much later than we thought. Then the precise timing of your whereabouts would be crucial." Vaillant's gaze darted toward the door. Poirot caught the flicker of hesitation before he masked it with a sneer. "The truth, Monsieur Vaillant," Poirot continued, "is that you were seen near the medicine cabinet." A beat of silence. Then Vaillant laughed, a dry and brittle sound. "So that's what this is about? Some foolish servant girl's gossip?" "Not gossip," Poirot said softly. "A fact?" Vaillant's fingers curled into a fist. "You have no proof." Poirot spread his hands. "Then why are you so concerned?" The words struck deep. Vaillant's breath came quicker now, his confidence slipping. Poirot pressed forward. "You knew of Delacroix's secret engagement to the Countess. You blackmailed him, hoping for a sum large enough to keep you comfortable, but Delacroix refused to pay. Worse, he threatened to expose you, so you took matters into your own hands."
Vaillant shook his head, but Poirot saw the pulse hammering at his throat. "You thought it was perfect, did you not?" Poirot continued. "You had access to the Countess's medicine cabinet, a little poison, so simple, so untraceable, but—"
"You miscalculated." Vaillant's breath hitched. Poirot tilted his head. "You assumed the poison would work quickly, but it did not, and so Delacroix lived longer than you expected. And in those hours he told someone what he had discovered, did he not?" Joubert moved forward. "Enough of this. Vaillant, you're coming with us." Vaillant lunged toward the door, but Joubert was quicker. In an instant, the inspector seized his arm and twisted it behind his back. Poirot merely sighed. "Ah, Monsieur Vaillant, a guilty man always runs." Vaillant struggled, but he was trapped. "This is absurd," he spat. "You have no proof." Poirot straightened his cuffs. "Proof? My dear monsieur, you just provided it yourself." Joubert led Vaillant away, the echoes of his protests fading down the corridor. Poirot turned to me, a satisfied smile on his lips. "Ah, Hastings. The truth, it is always most obliging if one knows how to invite it out of hiding." Chapter 12. The murderer's Achilles' heel Hercule Poirot sat at the large oak writing desk in the study of the late Monsieur Delacroix. The room was dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn to keep out the harsh midday sun. Before him lay a single, sheet of paper, the so-called suicide note, its ink slightly smudged, the strokes uneven. Beside it, a selection of Delacroix's personal correspondence, each letter penned with the same meticulous precision that Poirot had come to expect from the deceased diplomat. Inspector Joubert stood across the room, arms folded, watching Poirot, with the mixture of admiration and exasperation he often reserved for the little Belgian detective. "So," Joubert said, his voice measured, "what do you make of it?" Poirot tapped the suicide note with a delicate finger. "This, mon ami—"
As an insult to logic, Hastings leaned forward in his chair.
"You mean it's a forgery?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Ah, my dear Hastings, forgery is a crude word. Let us say instead that it is an imitation, a poor one at that. Observe." He lifted the note and one of Delacroix's personal letters side by side, angling them toward the light. "Do you see, mes amis? The loops of the D in Delacroix's hand, they are always closed, tight, controlled. Here they are open, imprecise. And the pressure of the pen, Delacroix pressed firmly, the ink bold, unwavering. But look at this suicide note, the hesitation, the inconsistency in strokes. It is the work of someone attempting to mimic his
Hand, but failing, Joubert exhaled sharply. Sacre bleu. You are certain? Poirot gave a slight, self-satisfied smile. I am always certain, mon cher. Hastings leaned closer. But who would have forged it? Poirot's fingers tapped
lightly on the desk. That is the true question, is it not? And what do we know about the one who forges, mon ami? Joubert frowned. That they must have had access to Delacroix's letters to study his handwriting, Poirot nodded. Exactement. Which means our circle of suspects grows smaller. But there is more. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a magnifying glass. With slow precision, he examined the ink. A satisfied murmur escaped him. "The ink," he said softly. "It is not quite dry in places. Someone wrote this letter after Delacroix's death in an attempt to mislead us." Joubert frowned. "Which means the murderer is someone who wanted us to believe Delacroix took his own life." "Oui." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And why would one wish to stage a suicide? To divert attention from a more inconvenient truth, no?" A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. A young constable entered, holding a small notebook. "Inspector, we've questioned the household staff again. One of the maids recalls that Monsieur Delacroix received a visitor late on the evening of his death." "A woman?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A woman? Did she see her face?" The constable shook his head. "No, sir, but she said the visitor's hands were gloved and she wore a veil." Poirot's fingers drummed on the desk. "Gloves and a veil, how very convenient. One wishes to conceal both the face and the fingerprints." Joubert's eyes darkened. "The Countess?" Poirot was silent for a long moment. Then he rose to his feet, smoothing his waistcoat. "We shall see, mon ami. We shall see." The evening air was cool as Poirot and Hastings made their way toward the Countess de Rochefort's private apartments. The grand townhouse loomed before them, its iron gates gleaming under the gas lamps. A butler admitted them without protest, leading them into a lavish sitting-room where the Countess waited, poised and elegant, her dark eyes betraying no hint of concern. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. Poirot took his time, settling into a velvet chair and adjusting his cuffs. "Madame, I have come to speak of handwriting." A flicker of something, was it tension, crossed her face. "Handwriting?" she repeated. "Oui." You see, I have examined the so-called suicide note of your late fiancée, and I find it curious. She did not move. Poirot continued, his tone light, almost conversational. The note, madame, was written by someone who did not know Delacroix's hand as well as they thought. The loops, the pressure of the pen, the ink. Ah, they tell me such interesting things. The Countess remained silent, but Poirot saw the way her fingers clenched ever so slightly against the fabric of her gown. Hastings shifted in his seat, uneasy. "Madame, you visited Delacroix that night, didn't you?" She exhaled softly, her gaze turning toward the window. "Yes," she said at last. "I went to see him." Joubert, who had been standing near the door, took a step forward. "Then you admit—" She held up a gloved hand. "I admit nothing, Inspector. I went to see him, but he was already dead when I arrived." Poirot studied her intently. "Then tell me, madame, if he was already dead, why did you forge a note in his name?" The silence was heavy, suffocating. Then the Countess smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "You are very clever, Monsieur Poirot," she murmured. "But cleverness is not proof." Poirot's own smile was sharper. "Ah, but you forget, madame, I am not merely clever. I am thorough." Joubert moved toward her. "Madame de Rochefort, I am placing you under arrest." She did not resist. Instead, she lifted her chin, her dark eyes flashing. "You may have caught me," she said quietly, "but you will never understand why." Poirot's gaze softened. "Ah, but I do, madame. Love is a dangerous thing." Chapter 13. The Unexpected. Twist, the heavy muffled toll of the grandfather clock in the hallway marked the hour as Poirot, Hastings, and Inspector Joubert stood in the grand drawing-room of Aigues, the Countess de Rochefort's townhouse. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. The Countess had been taken into custody, but Poirot's mind remained troubled. Something did not sit right. He had expected defiance, anger, even fear. But the Countess had gone with them, quietly, almost too willingly. It was not the reaction of a guilty woman. No, there was something more to this puzzle. Hastings, ever the practical one, spoke first. "Well, that's that, Poirot. She as much as admitted to forging the note, and she was there the night Delacroix died. Surely this is over." Poirot sighed, pressing his fingertips together. "Ah, my dear Hastings, if only it were so simple." He turned to Joubert. "Tell me, mon ami, what is to be done with Madame de Rochefort?" "She will remain in custody until we can formally charge her," the inspector replied. "Forgery alone—"
"Is enough. But if we can tie her directly to Delacroix's murder—"
He trailed off, his meaning clear. Poirot nodded absently, his mind still working through the implications. A sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A constable entered, looking pale. "Inspector, another incident. At the Hôtel Beauclerc." Joubert's expression darkened. "What incident?" The constable hesitated. "A poisoning, sir." Hastings stiffened. "Good Lord!" Poirot's head snapped up. "Mon Dieu! Who?" The constable swallowed hard. "Madame de Vry." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Poirot grabbed his hat. "Come, mes amis, we must move swiftly." The Hôtel Beauclerc was in chaos when they arrived. A small crowd had gathered in the grand foyer, whispering in hushed tones as a doctor hurried past with his bag. The manager wrung his hands, looking distressed. "She was found in her room," he said as they approached, barely breathing. "We sent for a doctor immediately." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Take me to her." They were led up a wide staircase, past gilded mirrors and ornate chandeliers, to the second floor. A maid stood outside one of the rooms, sobbing into her apron. Poirot paused beside her. "Mademoiselle, tell me what you saw." The girl sniffed. I brought her tea, just as I always do." She was reading a letter, then she suddenly gasped, clutched at her throat and collapsed. Poirot's expression was unreadable as he exchanged a glance with Joubert. "And the tea? Was it poisoned?" The maid hesitated. I don't know. She had barely touched it." Poirot stepped into the room, where Madame de Vries lay pale and motionless on the bed. The doctor stood beside her, checking her pulse. He turned as they entered. "She's weak, but she will recover. A slow-acting poison, likely administered in small doses over time." Joubert cursed under his breath. "The same as Delacroix?" The doctor nodded grimly. "Identical symptoms." Poirot's sharp gaze swept the room. A silver tray sat on a side table, the untouched teacup still resting upon it. But his attention was drawn elsewhere, to a crumpled letter clutched in Madame de Vries' hand. With great care, he eased the paper free and smoothed it out. His eyes darkened as he read. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "What does it say?" Poirot's voice was quiet, but heavy with meaning. "You are not safe." "The truth."
"Must remain buried, or you will share his fate." Joubert stiffened.
Sacre bleu! Someone tried to silence her. Poirot folded the letter neatly, slipping it into his pocket. "Non, mon ami, not just silence her. Someone is growing desperate, and desperation makes mistakes." He turned back to the doctor. "She will live?" The man nodded. "She was lucky. The dose was not fatal." Poirot's lips pursed. Or perhaps the murderer meant to frighten rather than kill. Hastings frowned. "But why poison her at all?" Poirot gave him a long, searching look. "Because, Hastings, she knows something, and now we must find out what." The doctor excused himself, and Poirot sat beside Madame de Vries' bed, studying her with quiet intensity. Her breathing was shallow, her face damp with sweat, but her eyelids fluttered. Poirot leaned in. "Madame," he said softly, "it is Poirot. Can you hear me?" A faint sound escaped her lips. Poirot pressed gently. "You received a letter? Someone warned you?" "Who?" Her fingers twitched weakly against the sheets. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came. Poirot leaned closer. "Tell me, madame, who wished to harm you?" A single word escaped her lips before her strength failed. "Cécile." Poirot sat back, his expression unreadable. Joubert's brows furrowed. "Cécile, the maid?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He turned instead to the teacup on the tray. Carefully, he lifted it, inspecting the rim. Then, with a sharp movement, he placed it down again. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I suggest we find Mademoiselle Cécile at once." Joubert wasted no time, stepping out into the hallway to summon a constable. Hastings, still bewildered, turned to Poirot. "Do you think she's involved?" Poirot gave a small sigh. "I do not think, Hastings. I know." Joubert returned moments later, his expression grim. "She's gone." A chill ran down Hastings's spine. "Gone? What do you mean?" "She left the hotel an hour ago," Joubert said. "Vanished without a trace." Poirot's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. "Then, mes amis, I fear we have just encountered our murderer's Achilles' heel." Hastings swallowed hard. "And what is that?" Poirot smiled, but there was no warmth in it, They are running out of time. Chapter 14. The trap is set. The grand salon of the Hotel Beauclerc was heavy with anticipation. A long table had been set in the centre of the room, but no one sat. The air was thick with perfume and unease. The Countess de Rochefort had been brought in under strict supervision, her face pale but composed. Madame de Vries, still weak, was present in a chair, though her fingers trembled whenever she reached for her glass of water. Inspector Joubert stood near the doors, his stance rigid, while Hastings remained at Poirot's side, his brow furrowed. In concentration, every key player in this mystery was present. Every suspect, every liar, every frightened soul entangled in the web of murder. Poirot stepped forward with deliberate slowness, clasping his hands together. His eyes, sharp and knowing, moved from face to face. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady. "The time has come to unravel the threads of this mystery. We now know that 2 poisonings have taken place. One fatal, one intended to silence.
And yet the true purpose behind these crimes remains obscured. What was our murderer trying to accomplish? And most importantly, who among you is responsible?" A hush fell over the room. The only sound was the distant ticking of the grand
Clock in the hall. Poirot let the silence stretch, let the tension build, before continuing. "Let us begin at the beginning, yes? Monsieur Delacroix, our first victim, a man whose presence in this hotel, whose very life, was a danger to someone." His gaze flickered to the Countess. "Madame de Rochefort, we know you forged a letter. We know you were there that night, but you did not kill him." A murmur rippled through the group. The Countess lifted her chin slightly, her lips parting as though to speak, but Poirot raised a hand. "No, madame, I do not exonerate you from your deceptions, but I do eliminate you from the role of murderer." He turned abruptly, fixing his gaze on the trembling Madame de Vries. "And you, madame, you were poisoned because you knew too much. But let us ask, what did you know?" Madame de Vries exhaled shakily, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw something that night. I did not think it was important at first, but after Delacroix was killed, I realized." Poirot took a step closer. "What did you see, madame?" She swallowed hard. "Someone in the corridor, just outside."
Delacroix's room. The group tensed. Poirot's voice was gentle but insistent. "And who was it?" Her eyes flickered, filled with fear. Then, in the smallest of voices, she murmured, "Mademoiselle Cécile." A gasp ran through the room.
The name hung in the air like a curse. Poirot nodded slowly. "Mais oui, Cécile, the maid who has now vanished." He turned to Joubert. "Tell me, mon ami, have your men uncovered anything?" Joubert shook his head. "Nothing yet. She has disappeared entirely." Poirot sighed. "It is unfortunate, but it does not matter. Even without her, the truth is within our grasp." He took a slow turn around the room, speaking as he moved. "Consider, mes amis, the facts. Someone lured Delacroix to this hotel. Someone ensured he was alone. Someone poisoned his drink. And when that was not enough, someone ensured his death." His voice dropped lower, and the room seemed to shrink in response. And then, days later, when Madame de Vries realized the truth, someone attempted to poison her as well. He stopped, standing at the head of the table. "We now know who was in the corridor that night. We now know who had the opportunity. But we must ask, who had the motive?" Silenced, a shifting of feet. Poirot let his gaze linger on each suspect, the weight of his scrutiny pressing down upon them. Then softly he spoke. Let us discuss Mademoiselle Cécile. Hastings frowned. But she's gone, Poirot. Just so, Hastings. And why? Why would a mere hotel maid flee in such a manner? The answer lay in the silence that followed. Poirot pressed forward. Because she was no mere maid. A flicker of something passed through Madame de Vries' eyes. Poirot caught it instantly. He turned to her. "You knew, did you not, madame? You recognized her." She hesitated, then finally nodded.
Yes, I knew her. A collective intake of breath. Hastings stepped forward, unable to contain his astonishment. "You knew her?" Madame de Vries' voice was frail. "Not at first. But then I saw her up close, and I remembered. Poirot's
Voice was soft. "Who was she, madame?" A shuddering breath. Then finally, Cécile Delacroix. Shock rippled through the room. Hastings let out an audible gasp. Joubert's fingers twitched. Even the Countess de Rochefort stiffened. Poirot's voice was gentle but unyielding. "The daughter of our murdered man?" Madame de Vries nodded. She changed her name, disguised herself. She wanted to be close to him, I think, to understand him. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Et voilà, the final piece. He turned back to the group, his voice once again controlled, methodical. "Consider what this means, mes amis. Cécile was there that night, but she did not kill her father. No, she was too late. She arrived after he was already dying." Hastings looked bewildered. "Then who?" Poirot took a slow breath. "Ah, Hastings, that is the final deception. You see, Cécile was not the only one in that corridor." He turned. His gaze locked onto a single figure. "The true murderer, mes amis, is among us." A hush fell over the room. Poirot held them all in suspense, letting the moment stretch unbearably. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. "And I will prove it." Chapter 15. The grand dénouement. The room was deathly silent. A moment ago, Poirot had declared that the true murderer was among them, and now all eyes darted nervously from one face to another. Inspector Joubert shifted slightly, his hand resting on his holster, as though expecting someone to make a sudden dash for freedom. The Countess de Rochefort remained still, her features carefully composed. Madame de Vries clutched the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white with tension. The air was thick with anticipation. Poirot, ever the master of suspense, did not immediately give them the name they so desperately wanted. Instead, he took a slow step forward, letting his gaze move deliberately across the room. "Let us consider, mes amis, what we now know," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. Monsieur Delacroix was not simply a diplomat. No, he was a
man who harbored secrets that others sought to bury with him.
Someone lured him here, to this hotel, under the pretense of an important meeting. Someone ensured that he would be alone. Someone poisoned his drink. He turned suddenly, fixing his gaze on the Countess. "Madame de Rochefort, your forged letter was a clever trick, yes, but it was not written to bring Delacroix here. It was sent after his death, to mislead." The Countess stiffened. "I have already admitted my role in that deception," she said coldly. "But I did not kill him." "Indeed, madame," Poirot agreed. "You did not." He turned now to Madame de Vries. "And you, madame, you were attacked because you saw something. You saw Mademoiselle Cécile in the corridor that night. But she was not alone. There was another shadow, a second figure." Madame de Vries drew in a sharp breath. "Yes," she whispered. I thought it was a trick of the light." "But no, there was another." Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, and that second figure was our murderer." The room tensed, the weight of Poirot's impending revelation pressing down upon them. Hastings, standing rigidly beside Joubert, felt his breath catch. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Inspector Leclerc." A collective gasp echoed through the salon. All eyes turned to Leclerc, who had remained silent throughout the entire interrogation. He did not move, did not flinch. His face, usually impassive, remained unreadable even now. Joubert's hand tightened on his revolver. "Leclerc?" he echoed, stunned. "That's impossible." Poirot shook his head. "On the contrary, mon ami, it is inevitable. Consider what we have learned. Delacroix was working against a network of corruption. He was a man with enemies, but the one enemy he underestimated was someone within the very system meant to protect him." He took a step closer to Leclerc. "You were assigned to oversee his security. You knew his movements. You intercepted his letters. And when you realized that he had discovered something incriminating about you, perhaps evidence of bribery, perhaps even treason, you knew you had no choice. He had to be silenced." A flicker of something, anger perhaps, passed through Leclerc's eyes. "This is absurd," he said, his voice controlled. "You have no proof." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but I do, mon cher. Consider the poison." He turned to the group. "We assume Delacroix was poisoned in his drink, yes? That it was administered shortly before his death. But we were deceived. The poison was not given in the wine. No, it was administered long before. Slowly, over time.
A cumulative dose, so that by the time Delacroix arrived at the hotel, he was already dying. It was merely a matter of ensuring that he never left. Hastings let out a slow exhale. "Good Lord," Poirot nodded. "A brilliant deception. When—"
The poison took full effect. Our murderers staged the scene to appear as suicide. A clever trick, but one that unravelled upon close inspection. He turned back to Leclerc. "You ensured that no autopsy would be conducted. You controlled the investigation. You misdirected our efforts at every turn, but you made one mistake." He remained silent. Poirot smiled slightly. "You underestimated me." For the first time, Leclerc's jaw clenched. Joubert moved forward. "Leclerc, if there is truth in this—" "There is no proof," Leclerc snapped. Poirot sighed, as though
disappointed.
"Come, mon cher. You have been meticulous, yes, but not perfect." He gestured to Joubert. "My dear Inspector, I took the liberty of requesting a full search of Leclerc's office this morning. Tell me, did your men find anything of interest?" Joubert hesitated, then nodded. A vial hidden in his desk. Hastings' breath caught. Poirot nodded solemnly. A vial of the very poison that killed Delacroix. A tense silence followed. Leclerc's hands twitched at his sides. His eyes flickered toward the door. Joubert stiffened. "Don't!" For a single moment Leclerc appeared to consider it. Then, at last, his shoulders dropped. He let out a slow breath, the fight leaving him. Poirot studied him with something almost like pity. "It is finished, monsieur." Joubert gestured to his men. They moved forward, swiftly and without hesitation. Within moments, Leclerc was in custody, his hands bound. He said nothing as they led him from the room. A stunned silence settled over the salon. It was Hastings who broke it. "Poirot, I shall never understand how you do it." Poirot chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, mon ami, it is the little grey cells. They never fail me." A sense of finality filled the air, and yet something remained, unfinished. Poirot turned back to the table, his expression thoughtful. "The blackmail letter?" he murmured. "The one that lured Delacroix here." It was not written by Leclerc. Hastings frowned. But if it wasn't Leclerc, then who? Poirot's smile was faint, his eyes distant. That, mon ami, is a mystery yet to be solved.